The Holy Trinity in the context of traditional MMOs is the three distinct roles: tank, healers, and DPS. These roles do exactly what they sound like. Tanks absorb and maintains aggro, healers keep the party alive, and DPS do damage. I'm sure we're all aware of how these roles work with each other to make a well-rounded party. This idea of the Holy Trinity has been around since decades ago, and it's been a solid system that has been the foundation of so many games, not even just MMOs, to this day. Hero shooters have adapted them into their core system too. But within the last 10 or so years, it seems that a decent amount of MMOs have tried to move away from this role system into more of a freeform, you can play whatever playstyle you desire system. I was watching the Chrono Odyssey developer interview the other day and got to the combat part where they mentioned moving away from the standard Holy Trinity system. And I mean, like I said, this isn't the first time the game has tried to do this. But it did make me think about previous games that didn't abide by this system and whether they were successful or not, and the reasonings behind the changes. And that's what I want to discuss here today. This idea of breaking away from the Holy Trinity. First, let's talk about the positives of the system, then negatives, and potential motivations for the change. The first point I bring up is actually kind of a double-edged sword, and that is role identity. I think it's valuable that a player has a set role that they adhere to, that places a specific kind of responsibility on them. Tanks lead and control the field, healers protect and sustain, DPS eliminate threats. Recently I've swapped from being a tank to a ranged DPS in the recent Savage in FF14, and I can't say I've enjoyed the transition. The main issue is that DPS as a role, ranged or melee, doesn't fit my character fantasy. I much prefer facing the boss, controlling aggro, and the party util that the tanks provide. I've never really thought about this point and how big of an impact it can have on someone's experience. The reason why I said it was a double-edged sword is because although the Holy Trinity offers role identity, breaking away from this can potentially offer a stronger personal identity. What I mean is that by allowing free customization of playstyles, players can develop a specific niche style that fits to them entirely. Like say for example you want to play a healer but also want to have melee capabilities. You can do that if you wanted to, provided that the game offers these skills and weapons. You can cook up something that's entirely unique to yourself, but this also takes away role identity. Since, are you a healer or are you a melee, and which side is stronger? Balancing these things is going to be a considerable challenge, but if done right, can be a step in the right direction. The next point I'm going to talk about ties into a core feature of online games, and that is shared responsibility. In having roles, you are indirectly supporting the notion of teamwork and a collective responsibility for people to perform their role. As a developer, you're now allowed more creative freedom in designing fights since you have access to a broader spectrum of mechanics. Having curable debuffs, role-specific actions, and even making it so that specific clutch save situations can happen. For example, in Phase 4 and through, there's a mechanic where the main tank can solo sacrifice and save the run, and it has to specifically be the main tank since the damage is targeted. They could probably do something similar without roles too, but it might be a bit more difficult to design. This kind of teamwork though, in my opinion, is good in an MMO, a group of players working collectively to work towards a goal. Obviously, not all parts of the game has to require this teamwork, but for stuff like dungeons or endgame raids, I think having teamwork is a good thing. Now let's talk about the motivations behind the change. There's the good old saying, don't fix it if it ain't broke, and to be honest, I don't think the Trinity system is a broken system, but it does have its fair share of problems. Immediately, I can think of a few that are pretty common. The first is queue times, which is also directly related to role scarcity. We've all tried to queue up for a dungeon or raid before, only to wait for an extended period of time before the queue popping. Because more often than not, the amount of people that choose DPS outnumber the amount of people that choose tanks or heals. Not to mention that for a lot of games, they have way more DPS classes than support classes. Let's take a look at the two most popular overarching MMOs, WoW and FF14. WoW has more than 20 DPS specs whilst having less than 10 specs for healers and tanks. And similarly, FF14 has 14 DPS jobs, 13 if you're not counting Blue Mage, and only 4 tank and healer jobs. Nobody wants to wait 20 minutes for a dungeon pop, and this becomes even more of a problem in less populated servers. By moving away from the traditional Holy Trinity, queue times will as a result become shorter naturally because no longer are you waiting specifically for a healer to join, all the game is looking for are a sufficient number of players to begin the instance with. Another point to bring up alongside queue times is the requirement for certain classes to be present in a party. How many times have you seen or heard of a party which is only accepting specific classes due to their unique specialization or ability? Although I think developers have realized that this is bad game design and are actively trying to balance the classes in a way that they're all viable, these cases still happen. A recent example I saw was when I was progging through. The Pictomancer job was so strong in this fight that it toppled all of the other DPS by a significant margin in all phases except one. It's very possible to clear this fight without a Pictomancer, but I did see a few parties where they locked the DPS slot to Picto only. And I mean, who can really blame them? Why risk the chance of not meeting the DPS check when with the Pictomancer, you can afford so many more mistakes as the party because the Picto will just make up the rest of the damage? To be honest, I don't know how any game is going to fix this issue apart from just balancing the jobs in a healthy way. And I haven't dove deep enough into action-based MMOs to know if this issue persists in those type of games, so let me know if this is also a problem in those games. The third point is about the game's intended design philosophy. A lot of MMOs these days have more of a focus on solo play. Games like Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls, Black Desert are all very solo-friendly combat action experiences. The game doesn't really force you to play with other people to progress, although there are multiplayer options. There's a lot of reasons for this, but I think the main one is because MMOs used to be a place where people could escape to for hours on end, and there was no real endgame goal to play towards. Players would simply log in and chill in a whole other world, most of the time just talking to players around the town. Social media wasn't nearly as big, and communication platforms like Skype or Discord also weren't very popular. Apart from being a game, MMOs also acted as a community socializing platform. But as time went on and social media rose, there was no need for players to socialize inside of the game anymore because they could just do so on social media. If there was a community that you fitted in those games, you can bet that there's also one catered towards the exact same people on Discord. Why would you go through the trouble of logging in, checking who was online, and limit your social interactions to those people, when now, with a single click, there's a plethora of people from all around the world you could communicate with on social media? So if players were to play solo, then it would make more sense to move away from the role system, because it is difficult to design healers and tanks for both solo and group play. Even now, solo leveling a priest on WoW Classic, it's probably a good idea to go Shadow Priest until later levels than change to Holy. Moving to an action-based combat system also alleviates some of the pressure from crucial roles. Majority of the time when you're going into a dungeon or raid, you'll have way more DPS slots than tanks or healers, which puts more pressure on supports. Depending on the type of content, the damage missing from a bad DPS can be made up for by the other DPS if the rest are good. But it's not quite the same for supports. Since their numbers are lower, a death by one of the supports can force the party to adjust strats or otherwise throw the party into disarray. For example, imagine this scenario. There's a boss and 4 adds which have to be off-tanked. One of the healers makes a mistake and dies, which causes one of the off-tanks to die because they're not getting sufficient healing or debuff cleansing. That's not the tank's fault, they were still doing their job. Now one of the adds is on the DPS, and you can clearly see where this is going. In an action-based combat system, you shift a lot more of the party responsibility into personal responsibility, where if you didn't dodge or parry, that's on you. Nobody else could have done anything else to save you. This also runs less risk of a specific player being the cause of a whole wipe, since one player's actions are less impactful to the party than tab targeting games. As a result, this also probably means that there are more chances to clutch fights as long as you successfully dodge all the attacks, unless the boss has a body check mechanic, in which case, GG's. And the last point I'm going to talk about is that the gaming landscape itself has shifted drastically. The early MMOs mostly got inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons, and so the players that came into gaming during those times were more attuned to RPGs where roleplaying and specializations were expected. It was a slower and coordinated experience. Nowadays, the most popular games are MOBAs, shooters, and battle royales, all of which are action-based. They have relatively short matches, fast combat, reactive play, and instant gratification. And for the players who came into gaming through these genres, the idea of standing still to cast heals or managing aggro rotations may just seem dated and feel a bit clunky. Now, like I said, I personally don't mind the Trinity. It's a good way to balance out different parts of a team composition. And evidently, it's been an effective system since the 2 most popular MMOs over the years still use it. But at the same time, we as part of the overall MMO landscape have had one question throughout all these years. What is the next generation or breakthrough of MMOs going to look like? Countless games over the years have been hyped up to be the WoW killer, introducing new mechanics and systems only for them to fail miserably or be similar. And to be honest, I don't even know if there is a need for a WoW killer at all. A lot of the threads I've seen of people discussing this new way to develop an MMO like Ashes of Creation or the Riot MMO, people are actually content with having basically a WoW reskin just set in another universe. It's quite an interesting topic to think about. Would you prefer developers trying new things to try and bring about a new age of MMOs? Or would you prefer they stick to grounded systems and what has proven to work over the last 2 decades? Let me know, and thanks for watching.